The sun shone brightly over the old courthouse, its tall columns casting long shadows across the steps. Inside, the courtroom was already beginning to fill with people, each person settling into the worn wooden benches with quiet murmurs. Some were there for jury duty, others for curiosity, but no one expected the day to be anything more than routine. A few glanced up when the door opened again, but quickly returned to their conversations. Then Ethan walked in, and the whole atmosphere shifted. He was small for his age, just 8 years old, wearing a neat blue sweater and a pair of polished shoes that scuffed slightly against the floor. But what really caught everyone's attention wasn't Ethan's size or his serious expression. It was the golden retriever trotting faithfully beside him, a sturdy harness across his back that read, "Service Dog." Conversations paused. Heads turned. In a place where strict rules and cold procedures were the norm, the sight of a child and his dog felt like a breath of fresh air. Some smiled. Others looked confused, whispering to each other, trying to guess why a boy so young had come to court and why he needed a dog at his side. Ethan's mother walked closely behind him, her face a mixture of pride and worry. She guided him toward the front, where a special seat had been arranged. Ethan gripped Max's leash tightly, his knuckles turning white. Despite the warm room, a slight tremble ran through his hands. Max, sensing everything, pressed closer to his boy, brushing his side gently against Ethan's leg. The dog's calm presence seemed to steady him, and after a moment, Ethan took a deep breath and straightened his back, like a tiny soldier ready for a battle only he could fight. A few of the older lawyers at the front of the room frowned, clearly not used to such an unusual sight. The judge herself, a sharp-eyed woman known for her no-nonsense attitude, adjusted her glasses and gave the boy a curious glance. She said nothing, but her gaze lingered longer than usual. The bailiff called the court to order, his voice booming through the room. As people rose and sat again, their attention kept flickering back to the boy and his dog. There was something different about today. It wasn't just another case, just another witness. Something important was about to happen, and even though they didn't know what it was yet, everyone could feel it like a spark in the air. And it all started with a little boy, a golden retriever, and a bond strong enough to change everything. As the courtroom settled into a respectful silence, Ethan sat carefully in the special chair placed near the witness stand. His feet dangled just above the floor, and his small hands smoothed the front of his sweater nervously. Max, ever loyal, curled up at his feet but kept his head high, his warm brown eyes scanning the room protectively. The judge adjusted her papers and gave Ethan a nod of encouragement, a rare softness in her stern expression. Ethan nodded back, though his heart pounded loudly in his ears. This was not a place made for little boys. It was full of big words, heavy decisions, and unfamiliar faces. Still, he had promised himself, and Max, that he would be brave. A tall man in a dark suit approached the stand. He smiled gently as he introduced himself, but even his kind words could not erase the weight of the moment. Ethan clutched the edge of the chair tightly. He was here because he had seen something important, something that needed to be told, even if it scared him. Max, sensing Ethan's growing fear, shifted closer, resting his chin on Ethan's shoe. The simple touch grounded the boy, reminding him that he was not alone. Their bond was invisible to others, but to Ethan it was a lifeline, as real and strong as anything in the world. The man asked Ethan to state his name, and after a deep breath, Ethan's voice rang out, small but clear. Ethan Miller. It wasn't much, but it felt like climbing a mountain. A ripple of admiration moved through the courtroom. Question by question, the man guided Ethan through his testimony. Some questions were easy. Others made Ethan pause, his lip trembling slightly before he forced himself to go on. Through it all, Max stayed completely still, like a silent promise by his side. Ethan stole glances at his mother, who smiled at him with tearful pride. That gave him strength, but every time his voice wavered or he felt the panic rising inside his chest, he looked down at Max instead. Just one glance into those loyal eyes reminded him he had already overcome so much just by being there. To most people in the courtroom, it looked like a boy and his dog sitting quietly. But to Ethan, It was a battle fought and won in 1,000 tiny moments. Every shaky breath, every answered question, every time he didn't let fear silence him. By the time Ethan finished answering the first round of questions, something had shifted in the room. The lawyers, the jury, even the judge, they all saw it now. They weren't just witnessing a case. They were witnessing a different kind of courage, quiet, humble, and stronger than anyone could have expected. And Ethan was only just getting started. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one stretching longer than the last. The courtroom was so quiet that even the softest shuffle of papers seemed loud. Ethan sat still, his back straight, but deep down, he could feel the pressure building. His small fingers twisted nervously in his lap, while Max stayed calmly at his feet, a steady presence when everything else felt overwhelming. The prosecutor leaned forward, voice still kind, but a little more serious now. He asked Ethan to remember details, small things that would seem simple to an adult, but felt enormous to a boy trying to stay composed. What color was the car? How many people did he see? What exactly did he hear? Each question made Ethan's heart beat faster. He tried so hard to remember everything perfectly. He wanted to do well, to help, but the words started jumbling together in his mind. The more he thought about getting it right, the more the room seemed to close in around him. He glanced at the jury. 12 faces stared back, watching his every move. Some of them smiled gently, but others looked serious, even a little impatient. The judge's eyes, though not unkind, stayed sharp and focused. Ethan suddenly felt very small, like a leaf caught in a strong wind. His legs, dangling above the floor, began to swing slightly. It was a small movement, but it betrayed his rising anxiety. The lawyer noticed and softened his voice even more, giving Ethan time to gather his thoughts. Still, the boy's breathing grew quicker, and he blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears that he knew would only make everything harder. Max, ever alert, lifted his head from the floor. He didn't move yet, but he watched Ethan carefully, sensing the change before anyone else did. His tail gave a soft thump against the ground, a tiny reminder that he was there, ready if needed. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. The room spun slightly, and the words of the next question barely registered in his ears. The sounds of the courtroom faded, replaced by the pounding of his own heart. He was slipping, and he knew it. Somewhere deep inside, a memory surfaced. The special training sessions with Max. The whispered promises. The plan they had practiced over and over, just in case he ever needed help like this. Without thinking, Ethan tapped his knee twice in a secret rhythm, small enough that no one but Max would notice. It was the signal, and everything that happened next would leave the entire courtroom stunned. The moment Ethan tapped his knee, Max sprang into action. It was so smooth, so natural, that for a second, the entire courtroom froze, unsure of what they were seeing. Max stood up and placed his front paws gently across Ethan's lap, leaning his warm body against the boy's chest. He wasn't rough or distracting. It was deliberate, practiced, and full of purpose. Max pressed his weight down just enough to steady Ethan's breathing, just like they had trained for so many times before. Gasps rippled through the room. Jurors leaned forward. Some of the spectators covered their mouths. Even the prosecutor paused mid-sentence, completely thrown off his rhythm. No one had expected the dog to move, much less to do something so precise, so clearly meaningful. Ethan immediately wrapped his small arms around Max's broad shoulders. He buried his face in the soft golden fur, taking in a deep breath that smelled like home, like safety. His tiny body shook once, twice, and then steadied. The judge, who had seen thousands of courtroom scenes in her long career, stood up from her chair, her mouth slightly open. She adjusted her glasses again, but it wasn't because she couldn't see clearly. It was because what she was seeing touched something deep inside her. "Let's take a short recess," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. She banged her gavel lightly, but no one really needed the order. Everyone sat in stunned silence, as if afraid that moving would break the spell that had fallen over the room. Ethan's mother rushed forward but stopped a few feet away, understanding instinctively that Max had everything under control. She pressed her hands to her heart, tears streaming silently down her face. For several long moments, it was just Ethan and Max, boy and dog, best friends, fighters. The bailiff, a large man who usually looked as stern as a stone wall, wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. Some of the jurors openly wept. Others smiled through their tears, deeply moved by the unspoken bond they had just witnessed. Slowly, Ethan lifted his head. His cheeks were damp, but his eyes were clearer now, stronger. He gave a tiny nod to Max, who immediately returned to sitting neatly at Ethan's side, his job done for the moment. The judge cleared her throat, visibly collecting herself. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "we are not just here to hear evidence today. We are here to witness something truly extraordinary." And the day was far from over. The room remained still, the silence stretching long after the judge's words. It wasn't just the testimony that had left an impact. It was the bond between Ethan and Max, so pure and unspoken, that had captured the hearts of everyone in the courtroom. The audience had witnessed something more profound than just facts or legal arguments. They had seen the raw, unshakable connection between a boy and his service dog. Ethan, still clutching Max's soft fur, took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. He had calmed now, his earlier panic fading with each gentle stroke of Max's back. Max, sensing that Ethan needed a moment of peace, lay down at his feet, his head resting comfortably on Ethan's knee. The dog's eyes never left him, his presence a steady anchor. The judge, still visibly moved, gestured for the proceedings to continue, but there was an unspoken understanding that something had shifted. The usual cold, calculated energy of the courtroom had melted, replaced by a quiet reverence. Ethan's mother stood at the back of the room, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She had always known how much Max meant to Ethan, how the dog was more than just a pet or a helper. He was a lifeline, but seeing it so clearly in front of everyone else, seeing the way Max had saved Ethan in that moment, filled her heart with an overwhelming mixture of pride and gratitude. When the prosecutor stepped forward again, his tone had softened. He was no longer the stern, relentless figure from earlier. Instead, he spoke with a warmth that hadn't been there before. "Ethan," the prosecutor began, "I know that was difficult, but you did an incredible job. You showed real courage today." He smiled gently, acknowledging the young boy's strength and the crucial role Max had played in helping him stay calm. Ethan looked up, his eyes shining. He had always been quiet, never one to ask for attention. But now, with Max by his side, he felt a sense of confidence he had never known before. He gave a small nod, the hint of a smile tugging at his lips. Max, as if sensing the moment, raised his head and gave a soft bark, as if to say, "We're not done yet." The courtroom chuckled, and for a brief second, the weight of the situation lifted. It was just a boy and his dog once more, unbreakable, unstoppable. And as the questioning resumed, everyone in that courtroom knew one thing for sure. They weren't just witnessing a case being made. They were witnessing something far more powerful, the unspoken power of trust and friendship. The proceedings were slowly picking up pace once again. The prosecutor, more at ease now, continued with his questions, his tone gentler. But the energy in the courtroom had shifted. People were no longer just focusing on the facts of the case. They were watching Ethan and Max with a new understanding, a shared sense of awe. Yet, as the prosecutor asked the next question, something unusual happened. The judge, who had been observing carefully, suddenly raised her hand, interrupting the flow of the courtroom. "Stop," she said, her voice sharp but not unkind. Everyone froze. The prosecutor halted mid-sentence, his words trailing off into the air. The room became perfectly still. It was as though time had paused in that instant. The judge stood from her chair, her gaze fixed on Ethan and Max. Her stern expression softened as she looked down at the boy, still sitting quietly with his dog by his side. It wasn't just the bond between them that had caught her attention. It was something deeper, something that had touched her in a way she hadn't expected. "I need a moment," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. She walked to the edge of the bench, her eyes still locked on the pair. Max, sensing the change, stood up and moved closer to Ethan, who instinctively placed a hand on his head, as if reassuring him. It was the simple gesture that seemed to break the dam of emotions that had been building in the room. The judge cleared her throat and faced the courtroom, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. What we just witnessed is not something I can ignore. This is not just about legal arguments or facts being presented. This is about humanity. It's about compassion, trust, and love. And it's about the quiet strength that comes from these two, Ethan and Max. She paused for a moment, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. There was no anger or frustration in her tone. Instead, there was a profound respect, a recognition that something extraordinary had just unfolded in front of everyone in the room. The courtroom was silent. Even the most seasoned attorneys, who had seen countless cases come and go, couldn't find words to respond. The power of the moment was undeniable. I think we all need a moment to reflect. The judge continued softly. We are witnesses to something far greater than the legal case at hand. And with that, she called for a short recess, allowing everyone in the room a moment to process what had just happened. The recess was a welcome break for everyone, but it didn't take long for the energy in the room to shift back to the case at hand. As people returned to their seats, there was a quiet buzz of conversation, a mix of whispers and soft murmurs. It was clear that the events of the last few minutes had left everyone deeply moved. No one in that courtroom would ever forget the bond between Ethan and Max. When the judge returned to her seat, she glanced over at the boy and his dog. With a soft nod, she signaled for the proceedings to continue. But the atmosphere was different now. It wasn't just a courtroom anymore. It had become a place where people were ready to listen, to hear not just the facts but the heart of the story. Ethan, the judge said gently, I know you're feeling a lot right now, and I want to thank you for your courage today. But I also think it's important for everyone here to understand just how much your dog, Max, means to you. Can you tell us about your special bond with him? Ethan hesitated for a moment, his small hands fidgeting with the edge of the witness stand. He glanced at Max, who was lying quietly at his feet, his eyes soft and patient. Ethan took a deep breath, his voice steady as he began to speak. Max and I have been together for a long time, he said quietly. When I first got him, I was really scared a lot. I didn't want to go places or talk to people. I felt like I couldn't do things on my own. He paused, his eyes not leaving Max's face. But Max, he helped me feel safe. He's always there when I'm scared, when I don't know what to do. We made a plan, just me and him. If I ever needed help, I'd give him a secret signal, and he'd know what to do. The courtroom was completely still. Even the judge leaned forward, captivated by the boy's words. Ethan continued, his voice growing stronger with each sentence. He's not just a dog, Ethan said, his eyes shining with emotion. He's my best friend. He helps me when I can't help myself. And today, when I was scared, I knew that if I gave him that signal, he would know exactly how to help me. There was a long pause. The weight of his words hung in the air, and for the first time, the courtroom wasn't just witnessing a legal case. It was witnessing the power of trust and friendship. Everyone in the room felt it, from the jurors to the lawyers to the judge herself. Max gave a soft bark, as if to confirm everything Ethan had just said. And in that moment, there was no doubt that Ethan and Max were a team, one that no one would ever forget. The room remained silent for a long moment after Ethan's words. It wasn't just the weight of the boy's testimony, but the undeniable truth that filled the space. Max was more than a service dog. He was a lifeline, a protector, and an unwavering companion to Ethan. Their bond wasn't something that could be easily explained. It had to be felt. The judge was the first to break the silence. Her voice was softer now, tinged with a rare emotion that even she couldn't hide. Thank you, Ethan. Thank you for sharing that with us. She paused for a moment, looking out at the jury, then at the audience. The people in the courtroom were not just witnesses to a case anymore. They were witnesses to something deeply personal, something that transcended legal arguments and cold facts. I've seen many cases in my time, the judge continued, her voice gaining strength, but I've never seen a display of courage quite like this. Ethan, you and Max have shown us what true bravery is. There was a collective shift in the room as the audience, the lawyers, and even the jurors took in the judge's words. The tension that had once filled the space was replaced by a profound sense of respect. The courtroom was no longer a place of cold deliberations. It had become a place of human connection. The prosecutor, who had been one of the first to show a slight change in demeanor, stood up slowly. His expression had softened considerably since the beginning of the trial. He looked at Ethan and Max and then at the judge, his voice steady but filled with admiration. "You know," he said, his tone reflective, "I've spent most of my career focused on facts, evidence, what's in black and white. But today, I've learned something different. I've learned that sometimes the most powerful evidence comes from the heart, and Ethan and Max have proven that." The jurors nodded in agreement, their eyes no longer focused on the legal arguments, but on the bond between the boy and his dog. There was an unspoken understanding that this was something beyond the reach of the law. It was a lesson in compassion, loyalty, and the strength of friendship. As the trial wrapped up and the judge prepared to deliver the final verdict, the courtroom was filled with a quiet sense of unity. No one could say what the outcome of the case would be, but everyone knew that Ethan and Max had already won something far more valuable. They had reminded everyone present that sometimes the greatest victories are not won in the courtroom, but in the hearts of those we hold dear.